to the Fireside Chat hosted in conjunction with University of Edinburgh Centre for Business, Climate Change and Sustainability. This is definitely a fireside chat, so please, if anyone in the audience has questions, don't be afraid to raise your hands, pose them to our guests ourselves. But as a quick introduction of myself, and I'll pass off to our esteemed panelists, my name is Lauren Chin. I'm an impact coordinator at BCAS. I'm here on behalf of Kathy Kisahage, who could not make it, unfortunately. So you are all stuck with me. And yeah, really delighted to be joined by Neil, Nick, and Murray over here. And I'll pass on really quick over to Neil to introduce himself.
All right. I think I introduced myself pretty well with that video, but I'm Neil Spackman, founder and CEO of Regenerative Resources, and we're a regenerative projects developer.
Thank you very much, Neil. My name's Nick Lythe, and I work for a company called Green Angel Syndicate. We are the only angel investment syndicate in the UK specialising in the fight against climate change. I should explain to those who don't know what an angel syndicate is. An angel syndicate is a club of angel investors, and angel investors are people who have an appetite for investing in startup and early stage companies. These are companies that can't get money through the normal channels, but need money in order to get going. In many ways, I think, Neil, your company, I don't know if you had any angel.
We had one angel.
You had one?
Yeah.
Right.
Which was enough to get going.
And I think Murray had none. Murray, if you don't need money, if you can build your company on your own, then that's the best way to do it. But companies that are inventing technologies or innovating with new processes often can't, and that's why angels are needed. The second thing I should explain is climate change. When we say we invest in, we specialize in the fight against climate change, we only invest in companies that can show that they already are, or they have the potential to, reduce carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, or remove carbon from the atmosphere. And if they can't do that, then we don't invest in them. That means we invest in a lot of new energy technology companies, new water-based water management companies, food and agriculture companies, natural resource companies, and increasingly we want to invest in nature-based solutions because we're not going to beat climate change without nature-based solutions.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Murray. I'm a recovering academic. Don't worry, I'm fine. I'm also the CEO and co-founder of Space Intelligence. We're providers of information to support the origination, monitoring of nature-based solutions for climate change, and particularly forests around the world. And we do this using artificial intelligence applied to big data from satellites. So we're a bunch of tree-hugging data geeks.
Wonderful. So now you have a flavor of who we've got on our panel, and we'll just sort of start the chat off with, we've touched a little bit on nature-based solutions, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Maybe we'll start with you, Neil, on what is an NBS and what is not NBS.
So I've got a pretty broad take on this, but if we think about the carbon cycle, mostly when we think about climate change, we're thinking about reducing of emissions, in which excess carbon in the form of nitrous oxide or methane or CO2 is entering the atmosphere. And there's a big push, and rightfully so, to reduce emissions, but I'd like you to engage in a thought experiment with me. Let's assume that we live in a carbon neutral society, that all of our energy is clean, we are not polluting the atmosphere anymore, and we've reached a stasis. If that were the case, we would still have 415 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, and it needs to go somewhere. And there's really only three places it can go. It can stay in the atmosphere, and most of us understand that that causes serious problems related to the greenhouse effect. It can go into the ocean, where it will cause ocean acidification, coral reef bleaching, and a whole lot of other problems. If the oceans die, we all die with it, which leaves the soil. And if all that extra carbon goes into the soil, it's actually positive externalities and happy times all around. So what nature-based solutions do fundamentally is they pull that unbalanced carbon out of the atmosphere or out of the ocean and get it into the soil. Beyond the issue of carbon, though, is if we were a carbon neutral society, we'd still be dealing with deforestation, desertification, dead zones in our oceans, erosion, biodiversity, and habitat loss. And these things are commonly understood to be related to climate change, but often not dealt with the kind of weight that they deserve on their own. But we need ecosystems to survive, and ecosystems only function with biodiversity. So aside from carbon, which is important, this entire set of issues related to our relationship with the earth and the fundamental water cycles, mineral cycles, biodiversity, and ecosystems on which all of us depend are a crisis in their own sense. And what nature-based solutions do is they deal with this much broader picture of climate and nature in a holistic way. And so this is why in our video we're not just talking about carbon, even though carbon is a way to monetize nature-based solutions now. We're dealing with this much broader set of issues that fundamentally deal with how we as Homo sapiens interact with our home.
Thanks, Neil. I just to underline what Neil said, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity in its 2019, spring 2019 report said for the first time that in all of the calculations at previous COPs, they had based their solutions, most notably in Paris in 2015, on the assumption that if we did deal with human emissions and cut them to zero, that nature would then cut in, and the ecosystems on which we have depended throughout the last 10,000 years to keep our climate in a stable state, would absorb the carbon, the excess carbon in the atmosphere, which is what is causing the global warming. It is in fact above 420 particles per million. It has never been in the whole history of civilization as we know it, the Holocene period, the last 10,000 years, above plus minus 300 particles per million. We have moved in the last 50 years above 350 through 400. We're at 420 now, and 450 is baked in. We are entering territory we've never been in before, and it's because of the carbon in the atmosphere. Now, I agree with everything Neil's doing. I think the regeneration is fantastic, and I'd agree with all of the direction of the work that Neil is doing. I think we have to treat the problem as something profoundly simple. Neil took 5 minutes. I'll take 5 seconds. Cut the carbon. We cannot live unless we do that. We've got to cut the carbon we're emitting, and we've got to pull it out of the atmosphere. The only way we have ever known to pull it out of the atmosphere until now is the ecosystems that we live with. And those ecosystems have been degenerated. Your video was fantastic. They've been completely degenerated all over the world. They've been degenerated on land, they've been degenerated in the oceans, they've been degenerated in the blue-green. I learnt a new term today. We talk about plus 1.5, that's an average. The poles are both already at between plus 6 and plus 7 degrees. That's why the ice is melting. As the ice melts, the feedback loop is that the oceans get warmer because the sun's rays are not being reflected back. We need this because we need to save ourselves. The environmental agenda for the last 30 years has talked about conservation, saving nature. Save nature because only nature can save you. And I mean you. I don't mean the world in Ghana or the world in the poor parts of the world. I mean you. It's all of us. That's why we've got to do it. And until we realize that's why we've got to do it, we're not going to do it properly. What I'm all about is trying to get money behind these solutions, the sort of things that Murray and Neil are already doing. We've invested in a company called Oceanium, which is taking farmed kelp, and its intellectual property is a new means of processing it, which is really, really clever, to make it create the resulting product of value, and actually some of it is for replacing plastics. So it's a double win. You're actually stimulating the kelp farming industry, and you're also replacing the plastics. That's a really clever nature-based solution. There's a much cuter one here in Scotland called the Scottish Bee Company that we've invested in, and they're developing Scottish heather honey, which has the same health properties as Manuka honey, but it's a quarter the price, which is fantastic. That's not the reason why we've invested in it. The reason why we've invested in it is because they're setting up a program that is called Repollinate, and it's all about repollinating essentially at the moment the UK, but the bigger they get, the more they want to spread it. We're again, save nature because only nature can save you. Pollination is a huge problem in the UK already, and we need to attend to it. The bee population is threatened. There are 9 different species of bats, of which 2 are approaching extinction. Bats are great pollinators. We've got to do this, and we've got to do it now, and that's what we as investors are trying to stimulate. So I say to you, my message to all of you, the message I take with me wherever I speak, is try and invent new things. Think of new things. Think of new things that we can be doing. The scientists among you are at an advantage. Work on them. These 2 people have been doing that for the last, I don't know how many years, Neil.
Dozen for me.
Dozen. It shows, because what you're doing is unbelievable. The output of what you're doing is incredible. We want to help you do more. We want to find the investment world that will put more and more money in so that you do more. Murray, you're much newer, aren't you?
I've been doing this for about 15 years in forests on and off, but then the company is about 3 years old
Yes.
itself. Yeah.
Again, I must stop talking. You tell us about your company.
Well, I don't know. Do you want to go on another question, or should I just? I'm happy to. Well, I've done my introduction, but I really like your point. The planet doesn't care. That's the really interesting bit. Like, I had a friend say to me once, like, "Oh, I just did my recycling." It's like, well, why are you telling me? I love that idea that the planet doesn't care. I mean, look through geological history. Species, ecosystems have come and gone. You're not doing it as a favour to the planet. It's a survival question for us.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a fundamentally important point, which reshapes this entire discussion. The planet doesn't care.
The planet is not watching you do your recycling, but we are. So yeah, I'd love to move on. Actually, Murray, what we've all sort of talked about is the circularity and the fact that it's not just about carbon, but it's really about touching on biodiversity. It's talking about like just any other aspects behind climate change. So Murray, I'd love to know a little bit more about space intelligence and how what you're doing there is supporting everything, not just carbon capture, carbon anything, but the conversation beyond carbon in climate change.
Okay, so that's an interesting one. I think you mentioned the biodiversity crisis, and that's the parallel crisis, which is somewhat the poor relation of the climate crisis. We know we're degrading biodiversity massively, so we have to address these 2 challenges in conjunction. The area that I work in specifically, in what we do in space intelligence, is support the conservation and restoration of forests around the world. And so our little role with our team of a growing team, we're only 12 people at the moment, is to provide information to set up the baselines, to understand the historical change in a site, and then to understand the amount of carbon which is stored in a forest, and then to track that over time. So that's all looking down on Earth with high volumes of satellite radar, optical data analysed with machine learning and artificial intelligence. And it's that kind of information which then tells people how many carbon credits you can generate from a site, and then that ultimately generates the income for a project, which means you can continue to undertake the activity, which provides all of these other benefits. One of the key points to make with respect to the other ecosystem services like biodiversity is that these kind of projects, the good ones, are developed under some kind of standard. And I think, Neil, you said you're developing under the gold standard. So these standards organizations will use methodologies or develop methodologies under which you're allowed to develop a project to ensure that the climate benefits are additional, but they'll also have some of the standards wrapped into them, biodiversity and community benefits. So there's an organisation called Plan Vivo in Edinburgh which focuses on the development of these kind of projects which are very much pro-poor. So we provide information to support the development of projects such as the ones that Neil is developing, and that's our role in this, independent providers of high quality information.
That's wonderful. And clearly a lot of partnerships that could come out of just between the three of you, and hopefully beyond in nature-based solutions. So kind of focusing a little bit more on the purpose of this panel and really how do we support these nature-based solutions? I'd love to hear from whoever wants to, really. The fireworks are in celebration of us, for the record. They're very excited we're here. But I'd love to hear a little bit on what sort of partnerships and maybe funding or policy making or support from larger organizations and financing is needed to make your individual solutions work. What do you need, if you could ask for anything in the world, what do you need to get to that next step and really start scaling even further?
I'll start. That's a big question. So I would, on the policy side of things, I think it's not very well understood that we are subsidizing our destruction. I don't know how many trillions it is of subsidies that go into fossil fuels, but beyond fossil fuels, I can speak to the United States and agriculture. Our farm bill is subsidizing systems that are completely destroying our soil, causing massive dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico. The most recent report I saw said that in the Midwest of the United States, which is the breadbasket of most of North America, 30 million acres are totally devoid of topsoil because of how we manage that land, because of the dominant agricultural systems. And that's not just carbon loss, that's a harbinger of famine and falling in productivity. And I think beyond energy, it's likely agriculture that is the greatest culprit that we're facing here. We've got a question in the back.
Can I suggest you use the link on the right, because it's the only one that seems to be working. There's another one here.
How's this one? Oh. Okay, sorry there. How garbled was it? Okay. No, so the short version of that point is that when it comes to policy, we're already subsidizing our destruction, which makes getting real solutions on the ground more difficult financially, but we've got to stop doing the negative while we're trying to build the positive, is the short version of that. For our organization specifically, we are nearly through the pre-development phase on about $250 million worth of projects spread between Mexico, Spain, Namibia, Ghana, and Mozambique, and hoping to add more in the future. So those are likely going to be carbon-based or real estate-based or project-based finance. But that's what we're looking for, since you asked.
Yeah, good luck. Yes, it's a very difficult question. The real heart of the difficulty of the question about nature-based solutions that we find is how to make them commercially viable, how to make them commercially valid. So seawater solutions, the work that's being done on governed wetlands, which is really great. I don't know anything about it. This is the first I've heard of it. But my worry for it is that it can't generate a revenue stream. Now, I hope I'm wrong, but rewilding is a big topic. That's the problem with rewilding. It's very difficult to generate a revenue stream. We have, in fact, invested in a rewilding project in Scotland called Bunloit, the Bunloit Estate, which found it cheated slightly. And the wonderful Isabel Tree and her NEP project. Again, there's a certain amount of cheating there. They create means of earning money out of what they're doing, which are slightly artificial. They're not, in fact, connected with what they're doing. Well, they're connected, but they aren't related to the core of what they're doing. And that, we live in a capitalist society. You need really, if you're going to initiate a program to develop anything, you need somehow to make it commercially viable rather than dependent upon charity. There is a huge irony in this, and something that applies to nature-based solutions in the most tragic way. We have, as a species, behaved like brigands and pirates, plundering a treasure trove without any form of payment. And at the end of the day, the payment we're going to make is the future of the species. We are going to die out because that's what we've done. Now, I'm not talking about the British colonial past and all of the coal mines and all of the gold and all of the resources we've stolen from the earth all over the world. I'm talking about now, right now. The oil and gas industry continues to pull oil out of the earth at zero cost. Sure, a lot of the things that they do in order to do it cost an enormous amount of money. And guess what? Back to your subsidies, Neil. There's a horrific statistic. Boris Johnson and his government announced the hydrogen strategy about 3 or 4 weeks ago and said proudly, they were going to put in 10 billion to support the hydrogen. Sorry, the figure was larger than that. It was 40 billion to hydrogen development over the next 10 years. That works out at 400 million. I was never very good at maths.
You work in finance, right?
So yes, it is. I'm just about getting it, aren't I? It's 400 million per annum from now to 2030. 400 million. Hold on to that figure, and 40. What did we say? 40 billion, we said, didn't we? In 2019, the UK government subsidised the oil and gas sector by 10.5 billion. 10.5 billion in 1 year. I wonder how much it's subsidising it now. One of the COP decisions was, in fact, to pull back the subsidies on oil and gas globally. The oil and gas industry is still hugely subsidised by every nation state that is engaged in oil and gas. Every single one.
So, there's two questions. There's the big policy questions, which we hope people over there are are addressing. But if we continue to think in this way, then it makes us feel it makes me feel a bit powerless. Yeah. Whereas actually, we're obviously in a room with a bunch of people who are doing stuff. Not that we shouldn't put pressure on people to address those perverse subsidies and the market failures, which you've highlighted. But so take the NEP estate. What could we do there in that case? People are talking about things like biodiversity credits. So biodiversity credits, in the same way that you have a carbon credit, it's non-fungible unit, right? Which is a fundamental problem, whereas a unit of CO2 is a unit of CO2 elsewhere. What kind of things are on the radar in the financial services sector, financial innovation, to address that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Do you want to go or should I?
Well, you talk about the financial, I'll talk about the credits for development.
I think the key answer to that is not credits, it's not trading, it is product. It is finding a way to take what Neil is doing particularly. I mean, you're delivering something different, but to take what Neil is doing and work on developing something that is a product-based. I mean, it might be food. It might. I'm not part of the problem. Well, you've already got the. Well, yeah, so it's building on that. Part of the problem with nature-based solutions is that nobody has got the glib answer. All of the answers, because we haven't been thinking about it as a global economy for very long. But I'm sure that is the solution. Create real businesses that governments can support and subsidise the way they subsidise oil and gas. And investors like us can put the money in. So that would be my answer.
Great.
We're going to take next, actually.
Yeah, I'll take yours. So I want to talk about two things there. First is that it is absolutely the need to change how we produce things, right? Food, fuel, and fiber, transportation, packaging, et cetera, right? And that people who figure out how to produce these things in a way that is regenerative or sustainable can then access a market, and that funds the developments. And so for us, we're focused, we've got about a dozen products that come off of our system, but one of which, I'll talk about one, which is a shrimp, right? The shrimp industry is notoriously dirty, both socially and environmentally, both in terms of the feed that they use. We're taking bycatch, and that's about a third of the shrimp feed that goes into farmed shrimp. Our shrimp is the first regenerative one, and what that means is that we're actually growing mangrove forests as a byproduct of our production methods, all right? And then off of those forests, we are producing the feed for our shrimp. So our shrimp grows forests, the forests feed our shrimp. It's kind of like the grass-fed beef of shrimp, except most beef doesn't actually grow prairies. They need the prairies, but they're not growing them.
So are you seeing an increase in the demand for those type of credits?
It's not on the market yet.
But you must have like a range of
there is
credits.
a huge amount of demand for that kind of thing. So on our systems, we have the products, and that actually funds the system. For us, carbon crediting it's another revenue stream, but it doesn't fund us. Now, when we get to biodiversity credits, one of the things we're doing is we have a partnership with the Cornell Bioacoustics Lab. And bioacoustics is a method for measuring changes in biodiversity on a site in a super cool way. I hope all of you geek out on this as much as I do. But what we will do on our sites is we put up poles with microphones on them, and we are recording the sound of our site at dawn and at dusk. We turn it on and off automatically. These audio files get pumped through an AI machine which recognizes every species of bird on our site by the bird song that is recorded by these audio files. So we can track, and in Eritrea, our project in Eritrea ran from 99 to 2004. We started with 22 species of bird on site. 4 years later, we had almost 250. We weren't using bioacoustics in that project, but in future projects we will be. And then what this allows us to do is to claim with proof that our systems are increasing biodiversity while we are producing our shrimp and our oysters and our algae and our mushrooms and the other stuff that we're producing off of that. One more thing here. Then what we can do with those audio files is we can attach them to an NFT and throw it out on the market and say, here's proof on a non-fungible token that we have increased biodiversity on this site. Market, how much do you value this? And that we don't need to be in any kind of, we're going to bypass the wait for a market on biodiversity credits, and we're just going to create our own with NFTs.
That's a really exciting
With
bit.
the proof to
And
go
that's
behind
empowering, isn't it? Because it's innovation. And then you
Yeah.
come up with an idea and you go out and do something. You don't have to, well, it's great that people are tying themselves to the Prime Minister of Norway or whatever they're doing over on the other side. But there's, getting these ideas out into the marketplace where there's real money which can be put into these projects is really, really exciting. You don't have to wait for somebody else to do something. You just, you're doing it.
We're doing it.
Yep.
And we'll see how they value it, It'll go to an auction, someone will buy it, and that'll fund the next million trees we grow.
So the question from there then is, how are you individually and how are your companies further optimizing? It sounds like there's some fantastic tech and ways to get to the market. Is there an opportunity to further optimize? Is there anything else, or are you pretty much there? Are you just there and you're just steaming ahead and nothing else is needed?
Well, for what we do, we're scaling up, so we produce the information that we provide on a case-by-case basis at the moment. So we work in projects across Latin America, Central Africa, and Southeast Asia. So what we're trying to do is scale up the maps that we produce of land cover change and carbon sequestration in forests, and also begin to understand the risks to forests from standard deforestation pressures, but also changes in climate, and bring this information together in one place at scale. So that's really the challenge for us as a technology company. It's like moving from a case-by-case basis to providing this information at scale. One thing we've done for the COP actually is just pull together a website called the Global Overview of Delivery of Carbon in Operational Projects, Good COP. You can find it on the Space Intelligence website, but it's an atlas of forest carbon projects around the world. So you can Google that and take a look, because we realised that nobody had ever put all these projects in one geospatial platform before. So take a look at that, and it's called Good COP. Just have a look on the Space Intelligence website, and you'll find that. So that's a way of bringing together information in one place about what activity is already being undertaken. Not entirely complete, because we'd like to add some more. I'm not sure if your projects are on there, for instance. We'd love to have them on there. But we'll be scaling up the technologies and the data sets which demonstrate the changes in a site which you were describing for biodiversity, but primarily with respect to carbon.
Shifting the conversation just a little bit, we clearly, there are solutions out there, and there are people willing to fund these solutions. I'm wondering if any of you think we need to change the narrative about communication around nature-based solutions, whether we need a more glib answer, and how we can get that. Clearly the people here really do believe in nature-based solutions, I hope. And further on, how do we convince those at COP, those at the big banks, those who should be convinced to put their support behind nature-based solutions?
You want me to start? I'll go on that one. The narrative we've got right now is fundamentally limiting. And the dominant narrative is that people are bad for the environment, and the best we can do is reduce our footprint. Right? And everybody's focused on more efficiency, doing less bad and reducing our footprint. It's the dominant narrative anywhere. And that stems from this thought that we are inherently damaging to Earth. Like by virtue of the fact that we are alive, we're hurting the planet. And that narrative certainly has a lot of evidence behind it. But the fundamental narrative that I'd like to shift to is that we are not destructive by nature, but by habit. And that as we are the cause of these problems, we are also the solution, and we can be the fundamental vector for the regeneration of the Earth. And there are societies that have lasted for 40,000 years, that have attained balance with and integrated themselves within ecosystems. We tend to call those indigenous societies. Not all indigenous societies reach that balance, but there are a number that have. And so for us, for me personally, I find a lot more hope and a lot more expectation of myself with the idea that my role is to be a keystone species rather than to be an apex predator. Right? A keystone species is a species where their behavior fundamentally changes the ecosystem and tends to hold it together functioning, like a beaver or a mangrove tree. And that's what we can be. We can be a keystone species instead of thinking of ourselves like a virus, right? From that famous clip of The Matrix. So that's the narrative that needs to shift, is that we don't have to think about how do we be less bad. We can actually be good for the planet if we accept our role as a keystone species. And that's what regenerative developments, that's what regenerative economies and the whole ethos of the regenerative movement is about. Fundamentally, that's the narrative.
I'm a marketing and sales specialist. I'm a salesman. If you're going to deliver the narrative, it's got to be a lot quicker than that. Oh, yeah. Save nature because only nature can save you. Now, you laugh, and I'm sorry. It was a cheap joke, but I mean it very, very seriously. In the last 30 years, we have comprehensively failed to address climate change and global warming. Comprehensively. Greta Thunberg, hands up, who knows the name Seven Suzuki? Absolutely no one. Seven Suzuki was a 12-year-old girl who at the Rio Earth Summit addressed the heads of state assembled there and said to them precisely what Greta Thunberg has been saying. Precisely. That's how much we've failed. Greta Thunberg is now, Seven Suzuki is now 40 years old. However, in a lamentable history of failure, the environmental movement has been the Cinderella of them all. There has been investment, there has been progress on energy. We're in the middle of an energy transition. On recycling, we all recycle. On aspects of food and agriculture, on aspects of water management, there's been progress. On the environment, there's been very, very, very little, and there's a good reason for that. It's because we have spent, as a civilization, perhaps Western civilization should be emphasized, the last 300, 400, 500 centuries in separating natural history from human history. There is a natural history museum in London. And then there are all sorts of other museums that deal with history. In historiography, in other words, the study of the writing of history, there are some notable articles explaining how that has damaged us, how it has held us back, because it has made us feel there is a complete separation between who we are and the acts we undertake and the choices we make and the environment. A separation. Whereas in fact, of course, there's no separation at all. All a city is an ant heap. It's an ant heap made of different components than the ants make them. We're animals. We are, the environment we live in is what sustains us, nothing else. And the failure of the environmental movement to deliver that message from the 1970s and the real development of Friends of the Earth and the World Wildlife Fund to now is the reason why there's been so little support for environmental issues, campaigns, and why it's been the Cinderella. We must change the narrative, and the narrative needs to become save nature because only nature can save you.
All right, thank you very much, everyone.
All right, thank you, Lauren, Neil, Nick, and Murray, for a really, really interesting discussion.